Hello and welcome to the first of hopefully many explainer videos from Sprint for PR's Move Fast and Break the Far Right series. Over this series, we will try to cover the reasons why we urgently need electoral reform. We will describe sophisticated electoral strategies that can be deployed to force desired election outcomes under our ridiculously vulnerable first-past-the-post electoral system. And we will describe how a wide array of different parties and political groupings can threaten to deploy these strategies in order to force electoral reform, bolster their own political success, and stand in the way of the right and far right gaining power. This particular video will cover the idea of preferential voting, preferential polling, and the potential for preferential electoral systems to fairly suppress far right representation. So here we have a simplified version of a preferential ballot paper. It allows you to rank the parties in order of preference. I don't have a strong opinion about which of the Greens or Lib Dems to rank first and second. Labour have been disappointing in government. I don't like the Tories. I really don't like reform. And there's a swastika on the ballot paper, so they're getting ranked last. Under a preferential system like the single transferable vote, these preferences matter when it comes to calculating who gets to represent each constituency. And here we have a representation of how these same preferences are recorded under first past the post, or a non-preferential proportional system. That coin toss decision over who to rank first now sees the Liberal Democrat candidate effectively ranked second, along with all the other candidates, including the actual Nazi. Voters should be allowed to express their preferences and to rank fascists last. That we currently cannot is a major failing of our democracy, and one that leaves us vulnerable to the overrepresentation of far-right parties, and ultimately vulnerable to a far-right government. Preferences matter. When half of voters polled last year would rank reform dead last, preferences matter. It is hard to say how much far-right representation would be restricted by a preferential voting system, but it certainly would be restricted relative to a list system with the same size of multi-member constituencies if these polling results accurately reflect the disdain the public have for the Reform UK agenda. It is entirely legitimate for progressive organisations to seek to model how a preferential system like the single transferable vote might impact the representation of the far right relative to a non-preferential list system. If they really want to serve the public, they could additionally model how these results are affected by different constituency sizes under both systems, and recommend the constituency size that best holds back the representation of the far right. In France, their far right party won 33% of the vote in their first round of voting last year and were leading in over half of constituencies. The French then have a second round of voting, which is usually between the two parties with the highest vote share in each constituency. So the French public could express their preferences between the far right National Rally and their closest competitor. As a result, both the left and centrist blocs overtook National Rally in the second round, leaving them with only 25% of seats in their parliament. Effective cooperation between left and centre parties in a preferential two-round system restricted the far right to 25% of seats, rather than a parliamentary majority on 33% of the vote. National Rally and its predecessor, the Front National, have long complained that the French electoral system is a conspiracy to lock them out of power. There may well be a long-established cordon sanitaire between other political parties that shuts them out of power, but that cordon sanitaire is guided by public votes. Whenever the French public are asked the question, "Are you sure you want a far-right representative?" in their second round of voting, they will very much tend to say "non, merci" in response. If the British public want to similarly shut Reform UK out of power, and preferential polling very much suggests they do, then progressives should help the public to do that by ensuring a preferential aspect to any new voting system. In Germany, the far-right AfD are very unpopular. When voters are asked to rank parties between -5 and +5, their average score is -2.4, well behind everyone else. Germany uses proportional representation, but it is not preferential, so it doesn't reflect the disdain voters have for the far right there. Indeed, the AfD achieved 21% of the vote and got 24% of seats, because smaller parties aren't allowed to get representatives if they don't reach 5% of the vote nationally. With Reform UK overtaking Labour in some polls, it is absolutely vital that we bring in a voting system that allows voters to show us who they don't like as well as who they do. We can't afford to sleepwalk into an election where the Conservatives and Reform could announce reciprocal stand-asides at the last minute and gain an illegitimate victory. We can't afford to adopt the German system that artificially inflates far-right representation due to not recording voters' preferences. And we shouldn't follow the French system that could produce wildly different results depending on whether parties are standing aside for each other in their first and second rounds. We need electoral reform to a preferential proportional system like the single transferable vote as soon as possible, so that we can fairly shut the far right out of gaining illegitimate power. Perhaps the UK can then lead the way for other countries to adopt similar reforms in search of democratic fairness and political stability. Wouldn't it be wonderful if the American electoral system in particular could adopt a system which allows multiple parties to compete for each voter's preferences? Later video explainers will go into more detail on how electoral reform can be achieved in this Parliament, but it is important to first spell out our desired destination. The case for preferential proportional representation could be strengthened even further by repeated preferential polling and by successfully modelling the likely effects of STV versus non-preferential list systems for constituencies with the same number of representatives. Repeated preferential polling might also consistently demonstrate that half the population would prefer anyone but a Reform UK representative speaking for them in Parliament. The newly recorded opinions of those who dislike the far right should then hopefully be a factor in the decisions of media organisations and the general public when considering whether they give Reform UK the time of day. The next election, under first past the post in the UK, is predicted to be utterly chaotic, with small changes in party support causing enormous swings in the size of the party groups that are elected. Electoral reform would be the best means of avoiding that chaos and unpredictability, but in later videos we'll explain how novel electoral strategies by progressive parties could create much greater certainty of a positive electoral outcome, even under first past the post. Please get in touch at sprint4pr@gmail.com, and if you're impatient to understand the rest of the Sprint for PR plan, then you can read more at sprint4pr.uk. This explainer has been voiced by an AI-generated clone. Sprint for PR is an important set of ideas being developed and explored by volunteers. If you would like to help us develop and promote these ideas, please get in touch.